Lecture 5, Part 3 is about productivity. Productivity is the key to growth and economic efficiency, full stop. The more productive we are per worker, the more the economy is going to grow. And the easiest way to think about that is the supply curve is going to shift out the more productive you are for holding everything else constant. So if you are, let's say you're a waiter and you're serving 3 tables in an hour. If you can serve 10 tables in an hour, your productivity has gone up and the supply curve has shifted out. There's more value created, and as a consequence, it is the key to growing an economy. So when we think about productivity, we're thinking about it plain and simple as output per worker. And when we think about it that way, another way to say it is bang for your buck. If I'm paying you a minimum wage and you are producing 10 units for me, and I all of a sudden introduce a new machine or a new approach to what you're doing, whatever it happens to be, and now you're producing 20 and I'm still paying you a minimum wage, well, productivity has gone up. Now productivity's gone up to the point where maybe I can now pay you even more because your value added to the economy has gone up. So the argument that we need to pay people a living wage, something like $15 an hour, makes sense if productivity also increases in terms of efficiency. And we're not talking about sharing the pie now, we're talking about growing the pie. So as long as I pay you more and your productivity increases by a little percentage more than what I'm paying you, the economy is going to grow. If I'm paying you more and you're not increasing your output, well, then what I've done is not grow the economy. I've just transferred wealth for me, the business owner, to you, the worker. And that may or may not be fair, but it hasn't grown the economy. But if it motivates you, if I pay you more and it motivates you so that the output is more, now me paying you more is actually growing the economy, okay? So productivity growth is the single most important factor affecting our economic well-being. And this is how everybody's tied in terms of the output market, goods and service market, the labor market, and the fact that just paying people more without an increase in output is not going to change the size of the economic pie. It's just going to move wealth around from A to B, and the pie is going to stagnate. And maybe that's what you want. Maybe that's what you want as an economic policy, but it's not what we've done here in the Western world. The Western world, and I can't stress this enough, has focused in on productivity, output per worker, and trying to increase the rate of productivity, innovation, R&D, having a new idea. Okay, so when we think about this, we call it the production function. That's just jargon for saying that output depends on labor, capital, technology, and natural resources. And by labor, we mean your skill, your human capital. Capital, we're talking about physical capital here. Technology is just innovations in research and development, R&D, smarter ideas, resources being natural capital. And together, you combine all these things into a production function, and that will generate output, and then that output has to be valued on the marketplace. And the more we dump into that production function, the more output we're going to get. And then the question is, you just can't get output for output's sake. I mean, if all we're producing is brown shoes and people don't want brown shoes, they want black shoes, well, then the output is going to have a very low value unless that's if somebody else who's producing black shoes is going to get all the business, right? So The key is being productive, but being productive in an industry in which the output is of high value. So when we say we're moving resources from low valued uses to high valued uses, what's happened over the past century is the labor force has moved from spending all their time in agriculture to now spending their time in goods and services, which are higher valued. And if you really think about it, Wyoming right now, 1% of the state GDP is agriculture. So even though we have this rich tradition of the cowboy and the cowgirl and all that, agriculture contributes 1% to state GDP, right? We have other things that contribute, higher values, which has been in the past energy resources, and nowadays tourism is another big part of it. So if you were to just, throw a dart at what job you're likely to get if you're trying to stay in Wyoming, if you had a dartboard up there with different jobs and you threw a dart, most likely you're going to hit the service industry because that has the highest value of output. All right, so this is what a production function looks like. So we've got labor on the horizontal axis, and we have output, notice, on the vertical. And the production function is that curved line. And so for any given level of labor, which looks like it's not marked on here, that it disappeared, half of it, my fault. There should be an L, big L, right under the dash line right there. Two different production functions are on here. One, with that amount of labor, we get Q1. And the second one, where we use a different technology, that's a more efficient technology, engineering efficiency, it's also more economically efficient because for that same amount of labor, now we produce Q2. We got more bang for the buck. And we also then are able to provide more goods and services. The supply curve shits out, all that idea, and the value created by trade expands. So this production function, I'll come back and do a lecture on this graph all by itself at some point. Okay, so 5 strategies to grow an economy by increasing consumption. 1, you increase productivity, so everybody produces more. 2, you put more people to work. 3, you save less money now and you devote more to production. 4, you import with more goods without exporting more. And 5, you get better prices for our exports so we can import more without borrowing or selling assets, which is another way of saying you increase productivity. Now, strategies 2, 3, and 4 are all short-run actions that don't do anything to increase growth because they're not increasing productivity. They're just putting people to work in order to work. I mean, if we wanted to put people to work, we could put everybody to work picking up trash all around the world. And by throwing garbage out your car window, you're creating jobs, right? But that's not really increasing the economic wealth. It's like smashing windows. Yeah. If you smash windows, people are going to have jobs fixing windows. But all you've done is smash windows, which didn't need to be smashed. And all you're doing is transferring money around as opposed to increasing the economic pie. Only number 1 and number 5 increase productivity, which increases the economic pie. Again, I can't stress it enough. Productivity is the key to economic growth, full stop. If we're not more productive, the economy will stagnate. So what's happened to productivity growth in the U.S.? Well, between 1900 and 1970, output per worker rose at about 2.3%. During the 50s and 60s, it was at 2.8%. And since 1970, the rate has been 1%. So the point being that it's almost like diminishing returns. we've kind of peaked out. What other innovations do we have? I mean, one of the biggest innovations in the whole world was the washing machine, because that freed up labor that was otherwise spent washing clothes half the day. And typically back then that was women. So you freed up 50% of the labor force by not having people spend all their time hand washing clothes. And so that happened in the 50s and 60s for the most part. But nowadays, this part in yellow, if productivity over the last 45 years has grown as fast as it did for the first 70 years, our standard of living would be 35% greater than it is today. So when productivity slows down, our standard of living, the rate at which we improve our standard of living also slows down. And you can see this gap right here. The red line would have been if we had continued to increase our productivity at the old rate, we would have followed the red line. But here's what we actually did, was follow the blue line, and you can see that the 35% gap in our standard of living because of our slower increase in productivity. So the question is the iPhone been an increase in productivity, or has it just been a distraction? You know, we've got all these phones, we're walking around with these supercomputers in our hands all day long. Has that made us more productive, or has it made us less productive? Well, we haven't seen a huge increase in productivity because we've had iPhones. We've seen an increase in leisure and social media and all that, but not an increase in productivity. The question is, when will this information access we have actually increase productivity? That remains to be seen. Okay, so why the productivity slump? Too much government intervention, too little, bad luck, technology, when will the computer boom actually take off? Maybe just bad data. The slackers here, the boomers, are soon to retire, and new generations will take over and you'll be super productive. What's going on here? Well, a lot of people believe that we should consume less and we should invest more in new technologies and education for the future. So in other words, we should all be more like Elon Musk and be innovators and take chances. And what we should do is spend money like we're currently doing on the Hathaway scholarships to make you as Wyoming students smarter so that you can innovate and break us out of the slump with some new great invention that isn't also just a time sink. All right, so 7 key factors that affect growth. Invest in private and public capital. That's just what we were saying. Excuse me. So we need infrastructure, and we need infrastructure in order to grow. So Wyoming always has had an infrastructure problem. We've got highways, but usually it's just to get from one end of the state to the other. Airports are important. Telecommunications, water, sanitation, all the things. Kind of, infrastructure sounds boring, but we need it to grow. Education and training. I truly believe that increasing human capital is the way to go. Men, women, children, everybody. Learn something new. Figure out how you can innovate. Figure out what you can bring to the table so that you can increase the output per worker. And output just doesn't have to be numbers. It could be quality of the output as well. It doesn't have to just be trash that you're producing. It could be quality items that you're producing. Better financial institutions. That just means the banks are able to lend money easier, right? So you're going to promote savings and you're going to promote investment. And when you promote savings, then you've got a pool of money that then other people can take a loan with a good idea. And as long as you got a well-functioning credit market, you can create value through trade by essentially trading money, right? I put money in the bank loans it out to somebody else, they pay interest, the bank pays me some interest, they get a little bit of money in between, they make money. But the idea is we treat money like another good. Macro stability. If you've got an economy that's out of control, say inflation, you can't grow. Argentina at one point had inflation at 10,000%, which meant the money that you took out in the morning from the bank wasn't worth enough to buy lunch. So you had to go back for more money to buy lunch because prices were increasing at such a fast rate that you didn't have enough money for lunch. So if you've got macroeconomic instability due to civil war, inflation, bad corrupt government, it's impossible to, again, increase output per worker. Open trade and investment, again, economists love open trade, and with the idea that we can invest in higher value products. In the US, all the manufacturing jobs, not them all, but a lot of them left to lower wage countries, which then meant we're going to have to come up with even more high valued products, whether they're pharmaceuticals or their tourism or their entertainment or their computers. Again, the idea is more output per worker. Income inequality and distribution. This will be lecture 6, but in brief, economists said, let's not worry about it because what's going to happen is the richer we get, at first there's going to be more and more inequality, but then, the rich are going to take care of the poor. That really hasn't necessarily been accomplished to the degree that some economists like this Kuznets curve. But we'll come back to that. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it this lecture. And finally, again, the stability of political and social institutions. If you've got economic freedom, minimal government interference, there's never going to be a zero government interference. As long as you're not having a revolution or a coup or assassinations or corruption, you've got an ability, again, to line up the incentives, risks, and rewards. All right, and this is where we'll pick up for the next lecture.